What's up,
YouTube?
YouTube?
Today, I'm very proud to announce this is the very first episode of my podcast. Oh, real people. That's what we're calling the podcast, guys. Also, thank you guys very much for 100 subscribers. This is, besides being the very first episode of the podcast, also the 100 subscriber special. I've been saying it since the beginning of the channel. At 100 subscribers, the podcast is coming out. So, let's get right into it. And I wrote this down, guys. I'm sorry. I'm a noob. I'm a podcast noob. I'm very excited to have on as the very first guest of the show a very special man, a former school psychologist with 4 master degrees in French civilization, Spanish, counseling, and school psychology, with 2 doctorate degrees in school psychology and clinical psychology, as well as a former member of the De La Salle Brothers and a heavily devoted Christian, and inspiration to all those around him on how to act and be as a person. Welcome to the podcast, my grandfather, aka Pop.
Pop it is. Now,
That's the name.
I don't have 4 masters. I really only have 3. It sounds like a quibble, but I have one in Spanish, one in counseling, one in school psych.
And what about the doctorates?
The doctorates are in clinical psych and in school psych.
Okay, so let's get right into it. You know how podcasts work, right? You watch quite a bit of podcasts.
I've seen a few, so I have an idea.
So let's start off. I do have some questions written down, but let's start off with this right away. Why do you have so many degrees? Because there's some people like me, I'm not going to college at all. At all. So what in your life makes you have 5 different degrees?
There are probably about half a dozen to a dozen separate reasons that sent me down that road. But as a guess, this is a guess now, I think the primary reason, the one that primed the pump, was what happened to me when I was in undergraduate college.
Which is like getting your associate's and bachelor's degree.
Getting my bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And what happened there is, at the beginning of my time, I'd signed up to be a physics major because in high school, I loved physics.
Yeah.
College physics was very different. So different, I was having a very rough time with it. So I went to the people you go to and spoke with them and managed to get myself switched out of physics into math. And I did that with a buddy of mine who also had been in physics and wanted to switch, and he wanted math. We were going to help each other as we made the switch.
Yeah.
We did that, and 2 things went wrong. Excuse me, I don't know if I have a frog in my throat and what you do with frogs, but anyway, we'll keep on going. So, 2 things went wrong right away. My friend dropped out.
He left you in the lurch?
Left me in the lurch.
No good.
And then the second thing is the counselor who assigned me the course load, and that was my 3rd year now.
In high school?
No.
Oh, in college. Okay.
See, I had started out in physics first year, second year.
Yeah.
By the end of second year, I could see this was not going to work. I got switched into math. Being a 3rd year student, they presumed that I had several math courses already, which were necessary for the ones they assigned me. And so I spent my junior year in college sitting in classrooms, not understanding a word. It's a year of that is somewhat like solitaire in prison. You're all alone. There's noises, you don't know what they mean. And so at the end of that year, I wound up with an F for the year, and basically I failed out of college. What I had to do was repeat the year, and I decided I'm going to go for language because I had had French in high school. I enjoyed it. So I signed up for a French major, and I made sure as an elective I took Spanish on the side. Anyway, after 5 long years in college, I get a bachelor's degree, and my cumulative average was 2.17.
Not too good. So, what was your plan
My
with a degree in language to become a teacher?
my whole plan throughout was I was getting ready to teach classes. Now, once I was done in college and I was in the school I was assigned to, I was part of a religious teaching order at that time. I started teaching French, but toward the end of the first semester, one of the teachers of Spanish had to drop out, family business, some kind of emergency. They asked me if I would teach Spanish. Now, I had 24 credits at that point. Let me see. No, 12 credits by that point. But I had picked up a certain knowledge of it because they taught it a different way. They used what were called language labs. And in those labs, you had to be speaking the language. So I told the principal I would do that if the Cuban exile teacher who was in our school would agree to spend a couple of afternoons a week with me walking in the neighborhood speaking only Spanish as a way to pump up my knowledge.
Yeah.
The process led me to fall in love with Spanish. I just ate it. I just thought it was a delicious language.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, I went forward, wound up going to Middlebury College in Vermont,
Okay.
which is an internationally known school for languages, got a master's in Spanish, and then went to Puerto Rico for 2 years, living only with non-English speaking people, but in the school teaching English as a foreign language.
But day to day Spanish.
My
Yeah.
whole life was in Spanish. So by the time I was done with that and came back to the United States, I was as fluent as any native. So I started back as a teacher in America again. The bad luck was my assignment was to a junior high school. All my teaching up to that point had been in a high school. You have to know, if you're a teacher, junior high school has another name, and that name is transient psychosis.
Never
The
heard that.
kids are crazy. Kids in junior high are kids who have grown up enough to start to reach the wild point, and controlling classrooms filled with those kids is heavy, hard work. So during the course of doing that for 5 years, I said, maybe my calling is to something else. Could it be counseling some of these kids? So I got a degree in counseling to see. But while I was doing that, one of the professors pulled me aside and said, McGowan, not counseling, you should go into psychology. So I thought about it, and that's how that final step came about.
Well, what's the real difference between counseling and psychology?
Aha. I'm going to say one word.
Because in the schools, because I would understand psychology as psychologists is different kind of than counseling, but you're in the schools being a school psychologist, being a school and you were a school counselor. So what's the real difference between a school psychologist and a school counselor?
Well, it's an excellent question, but I'm going to give you a one-word answer, which might require an explanation. The difference is depth.
Mm.
Right? If you're a school psychologist, properly trained, in the right component of psychology, there are various schools of psychology. If you have the right one, you can get to the provocative, the causes of behavior that is the source of concern in the school. You can find it out pretty easy if you know psychology at a certain amount of depth, which is not available in degrees in counseling. Once you know the source, you have a better shot at coming up with an intervention that will alter the behavior. That's such a problem.
So, like, your job as a school psychologist was basically going to different schools, and when there was someone who was really problematic, basically finding out, um, basically just fixing the issue that this child had.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Would you like an example?
Well, of course. Let's hear a story.
Okay. There was one school, it was a high school, and in that high school, there were youngsters who had various problems. Some of them had difficulty in learning, others had difficulty in behavior, and a number of different problems. In this particular high school, in a given class, there was a third year high school student, huge young man, very strong. And every now and again in the class, the teacher told me this part, he would begin rocking a little bit like this, murmuring to himself, and then he would get up and grab his individual desk, which is what all the students had, pick it up and heave it, toss it at any space that was in front of him. If there were students in that space, that desk went flying toward the students. And this was very dangerous. So when I got there, the vice principal said to me, uh, Larry, don't waste your time. This one is headed for exclusion. This boy is going to have to go to a private school. I said, it's too bad we work in the Department of Ed, because I'd make $100 bet with you on that one. Let's see how it turns out. So I started doing the things I had been trained to do, and I discovered his motivation. The thing that drove him more than any other thing was to get attention focused on himself.
Mm-hmm.
When he would start that little bit of rocking and moaning, it was because he was getting more and more upset that everybody else was having attention paid to them and he was getting none. And he wanted some. So what we did is we had the teacher once a day send him to another room with some kind of task that the teacher in the other room would agree to keep him there for 10 minutes. And back in the home class, the teacher would train the other students to exit the room at the sound of a clicker in under 30 seconds. They had a stopwatch, a clicker. She would say, all right, boys and girls, here we go, click. And they got to the point where they could clear the room in 20 seconds. I said, we're set. The next time that boy starts rocking, that's the giveaway as to what's coming. Click, clear the room, leave one adult there in the room for the safety of the boy, but empty everybody else out. He never did it again. In one shot, it was over. When I was talking later with the assistant principal, he said, how did you do it? And I said, imagine, who is that British actor, Shakespearean, Laurence Olivier. Imagine him moving on stage in a theater that's packed. And he starts with a line from Hamlet, to be or not to be. And everyone in the theater gets up and walks out. The impact of that would be devastating. And it's something like that that went on with this kid. He was doing his remarkable thing to get himself attention, and the theater emptied out. It was such a stunning thing for him that he never did it again. But we had the training to look for all those different things, and the training came from the right schools of psychology that had you look for all the pieces that come together that result in what's called a behavior. That's the final thing in a sequence.
So would you say like most people's problems come from like experiences that they've had in life, or is it things that they're born with, or is it a combination like different, so, two people might have the same experience, but because of their genetic predispositions, they experience it differently and it changes them differently.
Genetics does have an impact on your life pattern of behavior. I'm I'm not an expert in this. I'm simply a practicing psychologist. In my view, it's not the major punch, unless that genetic uh, input results in something like mental retardation, um, or some other severe impairment in functional processes. Then the genetics are really the important piece. But for the rest of us, genetics can have an impact on the moods you tend to have a bit more or a bit less. They can have an impact on related issues like that. But what you learn as you grow up from all the sources you are exposed to, the home, the friends outside, the school, the media, all of these things lead you in your mind to form a picture of how things are, how they should be, what's wrong with them when something goes wrong, and how much it shouldn't be. And you wind up inside yourself with a set of life guiding principles. The trouble is in there because all of us along the way somewhere will have a life guiding principle that's a bit too much for reality. So, for example, when you hear somebody say, he called me a, fill in the line, who does he think he is? He shouldn't do that. It's an extreme overreaction in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, if what he called you was a drug dealer in front of a cop and you had handcuffs put on, I'm not referring to that. That's a pretty rotten thing.
You're talking about more of like a egotistical
Yeah,
point of view.
insults to your sense of yourself,
Yeah.
and especially if done in the presence of other people. Now, what should one do? It depends on what the insult is, but the main thing is the self-discipline not to cross over the line into injured anger.
I
You hurt me, you no good, and then fill in all the words people use for that.
I heard someone say that the um the main reason for like why people kind of do everything is for power. Like it can
Well,
all be led back to power. So do you think like even when someone gets like insulted, they feel like they have less power and that's the reason why they might get angry?
I would think in that case, power may well be the motivating piece within the life guiding principles a person has. I have to have enough power and enough sense of self and presence of self in my world for people to give me basic respect. I have to have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a conviction. And then when somebody violates your conviction, you get furious. But not everything is power. Some people are driven by the desire to be wealthy.
But then again, what
And
does wealth bring you?
well, for
Power.
some people, it brings power. For others, it brings pleasure. There are people who want a lot of money so they can do all the fun things that they see other people doing. Why is that person on a private island in the Caribbean with a house like that, and I'm sitting in a 2-room flat that they're overcharging me for? I should be the one out there with my sailboat with the motor in the back and the bar down in the lower portion, below decks. So money, for the sake of what it can get you materially, can be a driving factor in people's lives.
All right, let's go back to what you said about how emotions, how genetics um affect your emotions a lot. So do you think that things like depression could be genetic?
I think there can be a genetic piece in depression. Yeah. Now, but be careful with this. Um, there are people who think that the minute you say genetics, you're talking about the bricks in the wall. They don't change. Bricks in the wall are solid. There they are. There's nothing you can do about them. Genetics aren't like that. Although genetics can predispose you to a somewhat to the depressive side of a view of life, you can do something about that.
Yeah.
You can train how you think about things. You can train yourself to see, and here I'm going to step out of psychology. You can train yourself to see what is life all about in the end.
Yeah.
And here you step out of psychology, counseling, whatever the daily, everyday thing is, into the realm of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And people of deep faith, even those who have a bit of a depressive cast to them, suffer it less, are moved by it less than those who do not have that gift that the people of faith have.
There's a question that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you. What what is the most important thing from the Bible that you think that everybody should know that would help people the most?
Well, I'm going to make a statement. People might think when they hear it, oh God, that's what they all say, meaning the preachers on TV and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's said, it hits the ears, so it's heard, but it isn't really heard. And that most important thing is God loves you. Now, just go back to the beginning of the Bible. It's the story, the account of this starts right there. At the beginning of the Bible, you have the world created, man and woman created. They're handed dominance over the world, it's theirs to run. Along comes Satan in disguise, and he pulls a beautiful con on Eve. She falls for it, winds up disobeying the one commandment God has given, and getting her husband to join her in that disobedience.
So would you say women are the root of all problems for
Not
men?
at all. No, 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 no. She did not receive the command directly from God. Adam did. It was Adam's job to make sure she knew that command as well as he did. And we can wonder about that one, can't we? So I'm not going to go into that. It's the women and all that sort of stuff. That's silliness.
Just joking, just joking. Don't cancel me.
Okay, we'll cancel that one.
No, I said don't cancel me to the viewers.
No,
That
no, no,
they
no.
don't all write hate comments about that I'm misogynist.
No, you're not. So in any event, um, here they go ahead, the two of them. This one commandment, they smash it. What happens?
They're punished or they're
No,
forgiven. Well, they're punished, but
God comes down.
they're not, completely thrown away.
You have a good part of the story down, but the core of the story, God comes down. He takes the side of the man and the woman. And the line at Genesis 3:15 is that he declares enmity between the serpent and the woman, his seed and her seed. His seed will snap at the heel of her seed will crush his head.
Yeah.
Now, just think about the implications. Here's this all-powerful God who has given everything to these two humans. And basically, the two humans give God this. Yeah. And what does God do? He loves them so much. He knows they were tricked into giving him the. He comes down, sides with them, and starts a process to beat back the disaster that caused.
Yeah.
If that's not love, there is no love. And there are many people who can hear that statement on TV, God is love, God loves you, without grasping the awesome, powerful reality of that love. It is beyond belief.
I think that the most important thing, which relates to God loving us, is I haven't like actually read the New Testament yet because I'm reading the Bible from the beginning. But I think the most important thing is when I don't exactly know which disciple asked him, like, how many times should we forgive man? And he says, like, 7 times 77. Because I feel like people don't even understand what Christianity and the Bible is about. I feel like the normal person does not even understand that it's not about being a perfect person and all this stuff. It's about literally the exact opposite of like the fact that nobody can be perfect, that everybody messes up and will continue to. The people that have been born and the people that will be born, nobody will be perfect ever. So it's actually all about forgiveness. And another thing too is that so many people will say, and so many people I know in real life will say, when I say like, "Oh, you should go to church," they'll say, "Well, I just try to be a good guy and I'll go to heaven. I'll just be a good person and go to heaven." And that's even what I used to say. I'll just be a good person and go to heaven. And even, you know what, actually, I'm thinking about right now, literally, I disliked it so much when grandma told me that even if you're a good person, even if you do things right, if you don't believe in Jesus, then you still won't go to heaven. And I didn't understand it. Because you think when you hear that, you think like, oh, you got to do this, you got to do it their way to go to heaven. I thought it's just about being a good person. Like I'm saying, that's what people think Christianity is about, just being a good person. But what it's actually about is that everybody is a bad person. We all have original sin. We're all drawn to sin. We all have temptations, okay? But through the graces of God, through God's love, he decides to forgive us. But the only way to get forgiven is to choose God and to ask for forgiveness. So you can't, nobody is a good person. You can't just say, I'm going to be a good person, because we've all done bad things.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you. You have raised dozens of questions about the faith in what you just said. In order to answer, if we could play back everything you said and stop it at the moment you said a given thing, we'd come up with several dozen different things that you've lighted on. And in order to answer what you just said now thoroughly, we'd probably have to have several dozen podcasts. I'm not very demanding, but I'm not cheap. That'll cost each viewer about $50 a podcast for the instructions.
No, listen, guys. It doesn't cost anything to watch the podcast. It's free, so watch the content.
If people are paying attention, they know I'm playing a little bit. Let's get off the playing and get serious. Okay? Step one. You don't have to be a good guy, but though you qualified that a little bit. What you do have to be is somebody making an effort to become better than you are. And you do need to go to church as a source of the energy for that effort.
But that's not the most important part.
What are you talking about?
If you're an atheist and you're just trying to be a better person.
We'll come to that in a moment. I'm talking about somebody who's a person of faith. The person is a person of faith, and you sound like you are. That person probably in life may not ever reach the point of having arrived. I'm perfect. But that person is under the obligation of having made the effort during life to try to get better using the means placed at his disposal by Jesus. Now, all of those means include regular worship of God. That means go to Mass on Sunday. Regular use of the other means that have been provided. If you're in deep sin, get your bones in and get them forgiven. If you have not yet been baptized, you just decided you would join the group and be part of it, speak to the person in charge and get yourself baptized. Follow the process leading to that. Once you're baptized, start doing the things that are part of the living process within the faith through which you do become better and better. We would expect that whatever you're doing wrong when you're 20 is not the same thing you're doing wrong when you're 50.
Yeah.
That you have improved, you've gotten better, and people tend to notice that.
I just want to take a little break from the podcast, guys, to show you today's sponsor, Holy Cross Clothing Brand. It's a clothing brand started by a good friend of mine, Cross. I'm going to put his IG somewhere up here. But yeah, guys, they have great quality t-shirts, as you could see. Oh, who's that? Is that me? It just might be. Anyway, though, guys, check it out. Apparel by HC on Instagram. And I'll put up Cross's Instagram up here somewhere. And thank you guys so much for watching. And let's get right back to it.
I think I did a lousy job.
I think
all right. To the statement, if you're not baptized, believing in Christ, going to church and working at being better, you won't make it. The pattern that Christ set up is that pattern. But Christ is God and is not subject to the pattern he established.
Yeah, of course.
He
Even Christ was a
can,
Jew.
well, Christ is God, whether he was Jewish or the first Catholic, however you want to characterize him in human terms, he is above human regulation and the source of it.
Yeah.
And he can say of a given life lived outside of any Christian influence of that person, that person lived in a way that he can decide merits heaven. The decision as to who goes to heaven or not is God's. But God has let us know what he does expect.
So what are you
But
saying, that you could still get into heaven even if you don't do those things?
I'm saying you do not have to be born in a Christian setting, raised religiously, observe it carefully, and live a holy life, and then you'll get to heaven.
Oh,
And
because you're
everybody
talking about
else is excluded. What I'm saying is there are some people born in areas where they've never heard, not only never heard about Jesus, never heard about God. I remember a particular program I was watching where John Lennox, a Northern Irish Protestant who is an evangelist for Christianity, he went to Russia shortly after the Soviet Union collapsed.
yeah.
And he was giving a presentation in the military academy.
Yeah.
And he started talking about God. And this one guy raised his hand immediately, and with all the medals on his chest, you could tell he was somebody important in the audience. And he said in an angry voice, perhaps even hitting his seat with his fist, "How come we never heard any of this?" And I believe John Lennox's answer was at first to simply pause, to let that question float around and get people reflecting on it. And then he asked, "Why do you think in the Soviet Union you never heard about it?" The answer, of course, was known by everybody. The Soviet Union was officially an atheistic state. Religion was not allowed. There were people who, from birth on through early life, through adult life, all the way to the end, were never exposed to the concept of God. They lived atheistic materialism.
Mm-hmm.
However, were they all just disposable junk? Would each and every one of those people, as they stood before God, would they be people that God could not find within them justification to invite them to him? Keep in mind what he did in the beginning when Adam and Eve violated his command. He jumped right in and started the move to turn it around. He didn't create a soul to just casually lose it. That's not God. God loves each and every one of them. That's why you have to forgive 70 times 7. Because the person who looks to you like your worst enemy is somebody God loves. And what he said was, don't start applying justice. That's my job. I'll take care of the justice part of things. You do not get involved in vengeance. Forgive and back out. Your forgiveness may mean you have to separate from the person and terminate contact since it can't be maintained. in any reasonable way, but you do not bear a grudge and carry it with you forever and tell people about how terrible this person was. Don't do that. It's over. It's finished. You're not holding it against the person, even if you have to step away from them. Judgment will come when they stand before the judge, and there's only one, God.
I think another thing too is how people just like perceive like the Christian world as being so different from like the material world. How people perceive like the spiritual world as being different from the material world, and they don't see how like things kind of are all intertwined.
Uh, I'm going to say rather bluntly, that's for lack of either not looking at it closely enough, studying it, or it's not being taught clearly enough by those to whom we go to get taught.
Yeah.
All right? The material world, and this, let me give you an example. Let's say in your life you wind up being, I don't know, what do they call those people who are nurses but are so high up in the chain, they're able to do doctoral stuff, like
No
write
clue.
prescriptions and so on. Nurse practitioner, is that?
I guess.
I think that's
No
the
clue.
name for it. Let's say you were to become something like that. Now, you're in a hospital, there's somebody there, they're dying of cancer, all right? At the moment, you can talk with them, they can talk with you, they can eat what you bring them to eat, but they're slowly fading away. You happen to come in, 5 minutes or so before they die, and you can see they're fading. You try to speak to them, you take their pulse, you ring the buzzer to get a crash team to come running. But before any of that can organize itself, the person dies. Now, consider the following question. Here's the moment of death, this 1 second in time. Person is alive up to here, dead. In the material world, what was there in that body during life that is not now there after the moment of death?
In the material world?
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if you want me to say soul or if you want me to
that's
say
not material.
maybe like the electrical pulse, the electrical whatever runs in our
Well,
brains.
that's the result of life. But all the pieces that do that and continue doing that while there's life, did any one of them cease and disappear?
Disappear? No.
No. So all the material pieces that were there in this living human being are still there now that the person is dead.
Mm-hmm.
So what changed?
Their soul?
It has to be spiritual because everything material is still there. Now, another way for people to begin to look at that is that all the studies they've done with near-death experience, they've had people on the operating table who have flatlined.
Yeah.
That means none of the indicators of any functioning going on except a little brain-based buzz, the last of the things to be there. There might be an occasional burst of that, but everything else is gone. They have no gag reflex. You shine a light in their eyes, the pupil won't change. As far as measurements are concerned, they're gone. And then 20 minutes later, whoop, they're back. And these people, and this has been studied very, very carefully, often come back with accounts of their experience while they were in that condition. And they cannot be explained materially. One that I remember clearly is the person said, I was in the waiting room listening to the conversation of my family while they were sitting there waiting to see what would happen in the operating room. And they were talking about me. And my cousin made a snide remark, which I didn't like. Namely, he said, boom, boom, boom. And he quotes it officially. That's in another room down the hall. And he, when his body apparently is dead, is picking it up, listening to it, remembering it. He then finds himself floating out the window. He looks back and he sees on the ledge there's an old sneaker. And the sneaker, it's a bit worn at the toe, and it's green and it's whatever. And anyway, when he comes back, he starts telling people what he experienced. And their thinking is, it's all a delusion. When the mind closes down, your body has delusions. Yeah, don't worry about it. He said, well, you got a sneaker on the ledge. So just to check, they get the maintenance guy to go look. Sure enough, the sneaker's on the ledge. It's an old sneaker. It's green. There isn't anything about it he didn't describe accurately. This is outside the building on the ledge. Mm-hmm. How did he do that if no part of his body left that table? So there's all sorts of ways that science shows that besides the material, there is something else. And that something else does not disappear at death. So it's something that you're going to want to nurture. That's what all the discussion about how do you go about it is focused on. Do I go to church? Do I do the things that I know are the way God would want them done? Do I avoid the things that I know God would want not done? That's how you get that non-material part of yourself in condition when the time comes for it to leave your body and stand before your creator.
Okay, so I have some questions that I wrote down. We could answer them quickly. You want to just do quick answers, or we could go in depth, or whatever you'd like to do.
You call it.
Fire.
You're the man in charge. This is your product, and you're going to have to get it ready for presentation. You tell me to stop if you want me to stop, or to add a little more detail if you think I didn't say enough. You call it.
Okay, so I think beyond, just your spirituality and, your professional career, people also would want to, have an insight to what it was like to grow up when you grew up in the 40s and the 50s. So one of the questions that I have for you is, what type of things did you do when you were a kid, when you were like a younger kid?
Okay. I have to lay out a pattern, which is different from probably most kids who are age equivalent to me when they were kids. When I was 4, my father died. It was 1942. The recession, not recession, the depression, worse than a recession. We were still coming out of it when the war broke out. And as we're coming out of it, the war hits.
Mm-hmm.
So here am I with a younger brother and an older brother, with a mother who's at home taking care of us, and a father who was working for the city as a meat inspector.
Oh, that's what your dad did?
Yeah, he had, with his brother, they had opened a bar down in 100 on 103rd Street or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sold out his part of the bar to his brother and got a job as a meat inspector with the city.
Mm-hmm.
All right. He was staying home because he wasn't feeling well. And then in December of 42, he died. Now, my mother has the following options: look for public support. In those years, the public support amounted probably to enough to ensure the living quality and the health of 2 or 3 mice.
You mean like welfare type thing? Like
Anything
public,
that
like.
any public assistance was
Mm.
so minimal, it might have been able to support a couple of mice. It was minimal. It was nothing.
But wasn't your mom also a nurse?
We're getting to that. The second choice, farm us out to members of the family. We had uncles with other kids. One of us go here, another go there, a third go here. My mother absolutely refused to have that happen because one of my dad's brothers had that done to him back in Ireland.
He was
And
sent out.
they had 8 children, and that brother was the 8th one born. They couldn't support him. So they had a kindly neighbor take him in. And that bent him for the rest of his life. He was a McGowan, but he wasn't with the McGowans.
Yeah.
And it was always on his mind, bothering him.
Yeah.
So my mother was in no way going to split us up like that.
Mm-hmm.
She was a registered nurse. She was employed until she took a maternity break by French Hospital. Um, she reactivated her employment, and through the nuns who were in charge of that, arranged for us to be in a boarding school in Tarrytown, New York.
So how old were you then?
I was between 4 and 5. The process was going on between December and August. In August, I turned 5.
So during World War II.
Oh, absolutely.
And let's also just, so everyone knows, where did you grow up?
Well, I spent 4 years in that boarding school in Tarrytown, New York.
Which is like an hour above New York City?
Oh no,
2 hours?
it's. Do you know where the
Tappan
Tappan Zee Bridge is?
Yeah. So like an hour and
All
a
right,
half
let's
ish.
say you were coming from the Nyack side. That's the west side on that bridge. As you come in, all of a sudden it curves toward the south and comes in to the other side at an angle. If it didn't do that curve, if it kept going straight in to the land it would hit is the land where my boarding school was.
Okay.
So it right where Tappan Zee Bridge would have gone if they hadn't curved it. So not very far north of New York.
Okay.
We could hop on the Grand Central Railroad, go home that way, come back. It's quite doable. Right? We were there for 4 years. In that time, my mother went through the grieving process, resettled herself, met a guy she liked. He had 2 kids. They decided, time to get together. What's the point in living alone? We like each other. Let's get married. So they got married. We all came together.
Mm-hmm.
So now there were 5 kids, and all of us roughly 2 years apart. My older brother, a little bit more than 2 years, then me. My younger brother, a shave less than 2 years, but it was about 2 years. Then my stepbrother, he was roughly 2 years younger than my younger brother. And then my stepsister, who was 2 years younger than her brother.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is they kept their last names. We kept our last names. And yet we became a family.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember on occasion people would say, "Who's that guy I see you hanging around with? Tommy Lynch." He's my brother. What? Your name's McGowan? Well, he's my stepbrother, but we don't think in those terms. He's my brother. I'm his brother. Oh, okay. So we blended. What happened is that gave me 4 more years till the end of grammar school when we all came back and reformed the family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and in those 4 years, we went to the local Catholic school. Its name was Good Shepherd School.
Mm-hmm.
It was on Isham Street and Seaman Avenue,
Yeah. And you were
way
growing up in Inwood.
in Inwood, northern tip of Manhattan Island.
Yeah.
Lovely area. I could not recommend a better area for any kid to grow up in than that area.
Mm-hmm.
Parkland all around, trails. They even had an Indian cave back up from the shoreline of where the Harlem River came into the Hudson. As you came away from that little shoreline there and started going uphill, you found the cave that the Indians had used years and years and years before as whatever they used it for. There were leftover ashes and things in there. Um, but you could go exploring. You had playgrounds. You had everything you would want, and it was safe. I remember one day I wanted to buy some practical jokes, and there was a store on 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, way downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and I lived way up. If the street was called Academy, but if it had a number, it would be 202nd Street.
Yeah.
I left my house, went to the nearest subway station, and for 1 nickel, got on that A train all the way down to 42nd Street, got out, crossed the street, bought the practical joke I wanted for 25 cents, came back, got on the subway, a nickel, all the way back home, and everything's safe. If anybody did that today, a kid my age, I was probably 11 or 12. I think I was 12. A 12-year-old kid getting on the subway all by himself, going all the way here, walking down in 42nd Street by himself, getting what he wanted in a store that he had never been in before, coming back. It was wonderful growing up. But in any event, the school I went to was run by the Christian Brothers. They were young, smart. They were well integrated guys. They liked each other. They were a good close bunch and athletic. They would come down from where they lived to the park near the school, and you'd see them shooting baskets, and having a grand old time. And they were active. So they were athletic. They were smart. They were easy to relate with. And after 4 years with those guys, I decided I'd become one of them. So that my high school years, 100 miles north of New York City, in a place called Barrytown, not Tarrytown, Barrytown, 100 miles up from New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I spent 4 years in high school up there and 1 year in religious training. And after that, I began college, about which you know the outcome.
Which we already talked about.
Yeah.
What when you were well, you were in the boarding school during most of the war, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember VJ Day. VJ Day was Victory in Japan. When that was announced,
Yeah.
all of us knew the devastation of the war. Even as kids, we knew the war was one devastating son of a gun. when VE Day came, Victory in Europe, there was still fighting going on, and it was bitter fighting. I mean, the fighting on Iwo Jima was a horror show. The fighting on any of those islands in the Pacific was a horror show. When that VJ Day came, we went out into the playgrounds away from the organized part of the playground to the edge where there was a lot of dirt. And we started building out of the dirt. We'd pour water on, make mud, a fleet of ships. And we designated one place as this is Japan. And we had the ships that we were making surrounding Japan. And we were laughing and yelling and jumping and just going crazy because the whole stupid, awful thing was finished. And we as kids knew what a great thing that was. So I was there when the war ended in 45.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, what was life like in the boarding school?
I don't remember it too much. I just know it was an okay time. We had kids that we liked, friendships. Uh, Going to school was easy. The only thing bad that happened to me during those 4 years in that boarding school was one of our play areas was a former barn when the property was owned by somebody else, and its floor was concrete. And we were playing tag or something, and I slipped and fell. I landed my head first on the concrete, and I saw double, and my head hurt for days.
Hmm.
And I was, in agony in the first hour or two after it happened. And that's the only bad thing I remember. Everything else, I remember sled riding in the winter down the hill at the end of the property, having a grand old time riding a sled down a hill in the snow, building snowmen. I remember hot chocolate in the evenings. Uh, I remember the nuns. They were really good people. Um, they were all Irish women who had gone to France to join this French religious order and then sent to America to teach school. So they all had brogues, Irish accents,
Hmm.
and we were familiar with that sound. So there was nothing strange there for us.
Everyone there was Irish?
Oh, no, no, I'm talking about me and my brothers.
Oh.
There were other kids who came from other backgrounds.
And what was life like when you were in the seminary in high school? Because that was kind of like a boarding school, right?
Yeah, it was, I would do it again. It, I never, in a 4 year period in my life, equaled the amount of sports I was involved in those 4 years. Every season had a sport and you took part. So you'd come back from summer vacation, the first 3 weeks, touch football. Every afternoon, school was over, out on the field, touch football. Also called association football in those years. After that, tackle football. Then as the weather cooled down and got too cool for that, basketball indoors. Then when it got to freezing, ice skating. And one of the best things in ice skating, down right next to the Hudson River, there was an inlet that was completely closed off by the Grand Central Railroad. So it was like a huge pond. We would go down there, get a lineup of 20 kids, straight line, start skating over the ice. And then the guy on one end, on a given signal, would dig his skates into the ice and stop dead. And the rest of the line would snap like a whip. and the guy on the far end would be sent like a bullet down the rest of the ice. What a blast that was.
And what, you would just crash into the snow?
Oh, no, there was enough
Or
length
it
of
was
this thing,
huge?
so huge, you'd finally slow down and come to a stop.
Hmm.
There was no danger involved in it. And if you fell in the ice, you were so bundled in clothing, it didn't matter. And I used to love all of that stuff that we did. We were great. Swimming in the summer. It just was great.
So after the seminary, you went to college.
Yeah.
And where was it?
The first year, the university that gave the degree was Catholic University in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so in
Right.
DC.
But it allowed the brothers to do the first 2 years of college under their own teachers who were qualified to do this. The first of the years, we went up to Troy, New York. That's near Albany. We did our first year of college up there. Then from there, we came down to Washington and did our second year of college within the brothers' house. And then in the third year, over on the main campus, as well as the fourth year.
And then you went to Vermont?
No. And then you were assigned to one school or another in the area where the brothers had schools. That could be anywhere from Rhode Island to Michigan. It's schools from Detroit out to Providence, Rhode Island, and that whole.
So then what did you do after the 4 years?
So after the 4 years, they sent me to a school in New York City, 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street, LaSalle Academy. I was there for 4 years. Then they reassigned me, and I wound up in a school in Syracuse. It's when I was in Syracuse that I got acceptance into Middlebury College. And after 2 years in Syracuse, at my request, I was assigned to Puerto Rico. Spent 2 years there, got assigned to Buffalo. And that's when I decided I don't think I really was meant to be a brother. Getting into that will be another 2 hours. I'm not going to give you the thinking and the experiences behind that. But at that point, I decided to leave, seeing my life as more likely in the line of being a married man with kids.
What was like the best time when you were a brother?
Oh, so many. It was a
What was
great.
like the best period when you were teaching on 2nd Avenue, when you were in high school, when you were in college in DC?
All of them were great. I mean, there wasn't anything about being a brother that I didn't enjoy, except that over time I began to realize, as good as this is not what I'm meant to be.
Yeah.
So after a couple of years of thinking it through, I requested a dispensation to leave, which they gave. I came out. The problem then is I was 33 years of age, and I had never so much as written a check for a bank in my life.
Yeah.
There were so many things about everyday life that people in the world, not in a monastery, but in the world, knew and took for granted that I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
How do you date a girl? I don't know. Never dated one. How do you buy a car? I guess you go to the car store. I don't
So how
know.
did you learn all these things?
I had people help me.
What people?
Uh, once I left, there was somebody I had met and gotten to know in Middlebury who taught in Smithtown. So through that person,
Long Island.
Smithtown, Long Island. Very good. To that person, I got an interview with the head of the language department.
Yeah.
He saw that I had a master's from Middlebury and 2 years in Puerto Rico, hired me like that.
The
Now,
language department?
yeah,
Okay.
the Smithtown schools, they taught French, Spanish, Italian,
So
I
what were
think
you teaching? Spanish
Spanish.
and French? Or just
No,
Spanish?
just Spanish.
Oh, yeah, because you went to Puerto Rico, so
Yeah.
that's why they wanted to hire you.
But they didn't put me in the high school, which is what I was hoping. They put me in a junior high.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, certainly for those years, and certainly out in the suburbs, junior high kids were a tough bunch to keep together, to keep focused, to keep on the job, to do the work they needed to do to get a passing grade. And if they failed, not to use their parents as a sledgehammer to beat a passing grade out of me.
So besides like your like career, like what about your like personal life after the seminary?
Well, after a while, I met someone. We did start dating, and we did marry, but it was an interfaith marriage. And it turned out there were some things about it that just could not be worked out. It couldn't.
Mhm.
So I had to step out.
Mhm.
And it was after that I met your grandmother,
Mhm.
and it was all over. Just, I have not met a woman who so embodied for me a faithful Christian in the way she did it. I was so caught by that. And I just, it was like a magnet and an iron filings. She was the magnet, I was the filings.
Like why? Because of just like what she did?
Well, not only that, she was an educated person. She was an occupational therapist.
Mhm.
So she could think. She was interested in things of the mind, interested in social things. She was not a shallow person without life preparation in any major area that I had life preparation in. So we were a fairly good match.
Mhm.
And but it was that faith thing in her. I just, after being in that interfaith marriage for a while, I was just so drawn. And here I am.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you quick questions.
Go,
Answer them quickly. Okay.
please.
Which was the best decade to live in?
I can't limit it to one decade. I would say the late 40s, all of the 50s and 60s,
That's
into
the
the
question was
70s.
one.
Pick one.
Yeah.
You pain in the neck. 60s.
Why?
Well, in the 60s, after that 5 year drag through college,
Yeah.
which ended in 62, and then I started teaching. For the rest of that decade, I recouped the destructive impact of that college experience, restructured my intellectual life and my professional teaching life. And I wound up by 68 to 70 living in Puerto Rico with guys I just had a blast with.
So that was like the biggest like change and like maturing decade for you? Like
Oh,
becoming like your own person?
that's a way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. What decade, like not based on personal experience, would you say was the best to live in? Like you think like overall for like the best like culture, the best like
For
for
people,
everybody, yeah.
either the 50s or the 60s.
Yeah, why?
Life wasn't crazy yet.
No. I also wanted to ask you before when you were talking about taking the train, when do you think New York City got to the point that it got to where it wasn't safe for someone to do something like that?
Oh, you can't put a date on that. You have to put a span of time. Um, I would think kids my age, like 12 and so on, when I was able to do that,
Yeah,
by about,
like the early 50s.
I did that, yeah, probably I did that in 50, 51, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
No problem, nothing. Might have done it in 49. It was back in those years when we had got out of the boarding school and formed up a new family. Anyway, when would that have been something parents would have said, "Don't do that"? I think by the 70s,
Yeah.
once the Vietnam War ended, and you had all that opposition to the war while it was going on, where people began to become rowdy about their opposition.
You think like people just starting to like trust like the government less and like having like a less trusting society?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. And you think the Vietnam War was like the main point or the
I
main
think the
like
Vietnam War.
factor in that?
I think the Vietnam War did us an awful lot of damage.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion, but I don't know if I should say it here. I think Kennedy was killed because he was going to just simply drop out of Vietnam.
Yeah.
We
They're
got
gonna come for you.
we
You know the truth. You know too much.
we got suckered into that one.
Yeah.
Vietnam was a French colony.
Yeah.
All of Indochina, Vietnam, North and South, Cambodia, Laos, these were French areas of colonial influence.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Vietnamese communists began their revolt, the French fought back, but then they got sucked into a battle where the defensive position they took. Now, I'm not a military man, but I'll tell you, it looked to me like the dopiest possible place you could have set up
What, like a valley?
it's like a valley surrounded by heights. And General Giap, GIAP, the Vietnamese general,
Mm-hmm.
he slaughtered the hell out of them.
Yeah.
So they were yelling for help. We were the ones who helped liberate them from the Nazis. I mean, we were friends with the French. All right, we'd go in, we sent in advisors.
But then they left. The French left when we got there, right?
Once there was enough of us there, boom, they were
Mm.
gone.
Because I was actually thinking the other day about like what if like Russia tries to like take over like all of Europe and like thinking about like the like it like you know like if Russia would try to take over Europe, of course America would get involved. Like, would I go to fight in the war? And then I was thinking about like, oh well, that's not really our war because. And then I was thinking about like Vietnam, but that's a bit different because Vietnam, like we went there and then like they just left.
Yeah, they were
And
gone.
it's like they left us with the problem. We weren't even helping them. We took over the problem. But with something like if Russia were to like go to like fight in try to take over Europe, I feel like I would have to go.
I
Because then if Russia took over Europe, or if took over freaking Poland and then Germany, then they're gonna try to take over the whole world, and then I would have to go.
I I come from a background where patriotism was a real value, and you're speaking the same way that that background trained me. If I were of age, I would do what you're doing,
Yeah,
or what you're saying.
but it's different because you got to think about what the war is about. Because if they're gonna do that to all of Europe,
They're going
it's
to
really a war of like,
who's in charge of the world.
yeah, exactly.
So you got to defend what
It's
you
like you got
have.
to stop stuff before it gets too big.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's keep going with these questions. Who influenced, and these are quick questions. Let's keep it quick. Who influenced you the most in life? What person?
My father, and I only have three memories of them, but they're very powerful. My mother.
No, who?
Hang on.
One person.
One person, the most. Catherine, your grandmother.
And how did she influence you the most?
You have to know what it's like to meet somebody who is, as far as you can tell, and over the years, it never failed, a person who is gooder than good, a person who is skilled and talented in various areas. Was a quality about her that may have been a piece of it. When she was a young girl, she hated hanging around with the girls. She always went out and played with the boys, stickball, whatever, you name it. She played the rough and tumble sports. Uh, so she had a sense of relating to guys that I have not seen except in a few women. Uh, and I think that was part of the draw without my even knowing it. What I was aware of was the solidity of her faith and the goodness that she exuded. She was not a person who was involved in nastiness,
Yeah.
whether it's gossip or tearing down, or I never noticed any of that. I loved her.
And how would you say she, in a short paraphrase, how would you say she influenced you the most in your like decision making or your thought processes?
I'll answer with an example, an imaginary example. Suppose as you were going along and you didn't have a commitment, male, female, and you met a woman who was, in fact, a real saint. And I don't mean walking around sighing, that kind of thing, but deep within, solid,
Mm-hmm.
good person of faith who knew what it was to be that and wanted it, uh, and yet skilled in daily life in the world and pretty, which your grandma was.
Let's
um, repeat the question.
How did she influence
I've
your
said
thought
I've given
process?
you the answer. She was so much. She influenced me by being who she was. Am I answering you?
Not really.
Try it again.
How did she influence you?
Oh, I'll say it again. She was able to relate to me in ways that weren't just what some people would call frilly feminine. She was able to relate to a guy having come from a background of a family background with 4 brothers in a neighborhood where, as she grew up and people were out in the streets playing, she would play with the guys, stickball or whatever was going on, basketball maybe, until, of course, she reached the age where it was time to put the dresses on and the lipstick and all of that. And then you couldn't be part of the guy crowd then. You had to be part of the girl crowd. But she had developed this way of relating that when I met her, I was just, it's like I knew her. Something about it was familiar to me. And I realized that background that she went through was a piece of it. She was familiar to me in faith. And I was longing for that because I hadn't had it for some years. Uh, she was pretty. That drew me. I liked that. She was intelligent and skilled. I liked that. She was all those things in the single package. And I knew I liked it before I met her. I met her teaching her in a class.
Mm-hmm.
But before I started teaching in the class, I was going over the list of those who were in it. And when I saw her name, this is not what happened, but I experienced it happening. I know it didn't physically happen, but here's what had happened. Name, 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 name. Wow.
You felt like attached.
Immediately
Mm.
seeing her name, I was like, what's going on here?
Okay. Biggest accomplishment of your life?
Biggest accomplishment of my life?
Yeah. Do personal and career wise.
Well, the biggest satisfaction is the way I'm going to put it in doing things.
Yeah. Accomplishment.
All right. But I'm going to reframe it. Instead of accomplishment, I'm going to call it what was the greatest satisfaction in doing stuff? And it was this: whatever I did, I gave it my best shot. And as I look back and I see each of those things I did, do you know that I actually started for Hofstra University a postdoctoral psych program?
You started the program?
I drew the whole thing up, the coursework, the teachers, and I got in the first year's students.
So that means like people could take that course to get a degree?
No, to get a postdoctoral certificate. They were all licensed psychologists coming to
Oh,
what
so you
I
started a program for people to get a
to
certificate.
get further training in psychology
Yeah.
because you can go deeper into it.
Yeah.
And I'm getting PhD psychologists coming to what I developed.
So you felt like you created something for people.
Absolutely.
You felt like you created something meaningful for not just anybody, but for people that you kind of like respected.
Yes, but I feel like I gave that my best shot and it hit.
Yeah.
But what happened is that was in the 80s, say around 83, 84, during which time a recession hit. And all of a sudden, people started pulling back on expenditures.
Yeah.
So, although I had enough students in the first year to support the program,
Yeah.
I did not have enough in the second year to support the program.
Yeah.
Hofstra had an ironclad rule, and they didn't give a damn what you thought about it. If your program was not supporting itself, It was over
So you only did it for 1 year?
2 years.
Oh, 2 years. And then they didn't like say like, oh, you could bring it back after that,
No,
or it was
no,
just completely done.
no.
Yeah. Okay. If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be?
Oh, Lord, help me. I'm going to leave this general. You're not going to hear the details.
No, you don't have to give details.
The most mixed up time in my life was the transitional years between when I was in the Brothers. We used to refer to ourselves as monks.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't technical monks like those who enter a monastery and that's it, they stay there.
Yeah.
We were active religious, going out teaching and whatever. But we could call ourselves monks. Now, in 71, I left the monks, and I was just on the verge of becoming 33 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
It took me some years to adapt to life in the world, no longer in the monastery. It was a major adaptation, and I did not do well. I fumbled, I bumbled, I went down wrong paths. If I could go back, I, I would make sure that I tapped myself on the shoulder and said, get yourself to a counselor and learn what to do and what not to do in this new setting that you have not been in since you were 14 years old.
So you wish you would have sought more guidance?
I wish I would have done better than I did. And if guidance was the way, yes.
Okay. What was the happiest time of your life?
Hmm. The time I remember most fondly was 66 to 68 when I was teaching in Syracuse.
In Syracuse. I thought you were going to say Puerto Rico.
No, Puerto Rico was 68 to 70.
Okay. And why Syracuse?
The people and the place. Syracuse, I think, has about 300,000 people now, maybe 400.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, I think it had 250,000. Syracuse was a small town, big city.
Wait.
It's a small town,
Small town,
big
big
city.
city.
Yes, you drive into central Syracuse, right in the middle. You look around. You could be anywhere in many parts of Manhattan, buildings, businesses. You looked like you were in a big city.
Yeah.
So you get in your car, you drive toward the north-south highway. Within 20 minutes of getting in your car and starting the engine, there was not a building in sight anywhere.
And you like that?
Wait a second. You were looking out over grassy fields with cows and crops and fresh air and just glorious countryside. And it struck me as such a beautiful combination. I loved it. It was a beautiful combination. That's number one. Number two, I remember going to the house of the parent of a kid. I had been invited.
Mm-hmm.
When I got there, I went through the process I would have gone through in New York City of making sure the car was locked up tight so that nobody could rip it off while I wasn't in it.
Yeah.
My not knowing it, there were people standing in the window of the house watching me. And when I came in, they asked me, What were you doing? What do you mean? What were you doing with the car? Blocking it. Why? So nobody could take it. They all started laughing. They said, you have to be out of your mind. Is that what New York is like?
Yes, it is.
People up here, if they get a call from a neighbor to come running over and do something, they'll drop what they're doing, go out the front door, run to their neighbor's house, forgetting not only to lock the front door, forgetting to shut it. No problem.
Yeah.
People up here don't do those things. Now, that wasn't just a proud statement about Syracuse citizens touting their city. That's the way it was.
So it's just a good place with
It
good
was
people.
the people were so good up there. The students, they weren't New York tough, but they weren't country bumpkins.
Yeah.
They were civilized, but there were no pushovers. And I knew if they had not given me Puerto Rico in '68,
You would have stayed there?
I would have stayed in Syracuse the rest of my life.
Well, let me ask you this. Why, when you left the brothers, did you move back to New York City?
Well, I had to get a job, number one. Number two, I didn't think leaving the brothers left me the option of getting a job as a layperson,
As a what?
as a layman,
What's that?
no longer a brother, no longer a religious.
Oh.
I'm now a layperson. I don't think leaving the brothers left me the option to apply to a brothers' school for a teaching job.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, why couldn't you have taught in Syracuse at a different school?
I didn't know anybody in the public school system.
Uh,
I had no connections whatsoever.
but you did in New York?
Well, in Smithtown.
Okay. So that
One
was just
of,
the only place that.
well, I mean, of people whom I got to know in Middlebury,
Yeah.
there were people from here and people from there and all these different places. But this one person was a language teacher,
Yeah.
Spanish, in a public school system on Long Island. My parents lived in New York. That might be a good arrangement where I'd be close enough to my parents if I had to get to them, I could get to them quickly.
Yeah.
Public school, so it'll pay at public school rates, which are better than the private school rates. Somebody there I know. It's not like I'm walking in a total stranger.
Yeah.
So I made that move. Now, it probably would have been better for me to have either gone directly into the New York City schools. No, it wouldn't have been. For all that I made bumble, fumble, stumble moves and a lot of mistakes in those years,
Mm-hmm.
if I hadn't gone through those years, I never would have gotten my doctorates. What I went through during those years drove me first to get a degree in counseling. And while I was there, I was informed by a guy I really esteemed,
Yeah.
McGowan, come here. Counseling isn't for you, psychology. Go get a doctorate.
Yeah. Did you listen to the Lent thing for Sunday on the app?
I did. Well, which point? I haven't gotten to the Monday ones yet. I was waiting for after this. I mean, the Tuesday one.
We listened to the Sunday one.
I did. What was it?
It was Father Mike Schmidt. It was about like the purpose of Lent.
Tell me.
Like the purpose of Lent. Like,
I did
why do we
listen
do
to it.
Lent? Why do we give things up? All this stuff.
What is it that you're asking now?
Well, I'm gonna bring something up. I was asking if you listened to it.
I did listen to
Okay.
it. I just don't.
I
I've
want
listened
you.
to so many things. I don't recall that specifically, but I
So one of the things that he was saying was about how, you know, the reason we do Lent is because it's, you give something away to become closer to God, and to like relinquish kind of like material stuff. But then he was talking about how you train your by not doing something, you train yourself to not do it, and when you do something, you train yourself to do it.
yeah,
But the thing that I want to talk about, and I
to
want
comment on.
to comment on, is how, and this is what he was saying. I actually saved it. It was so good. How when you are trying to get better at something, it doesn't. What's that word? What's the word for like?
Frustration is
No, 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 not for. What's the word for when you're like resilience? When you are being resilient, pushing yourself to do things, it feels like the opposite.
yeah.
When you're going through things to make you better, you actually feel less. You feel like a loser when you are, and I felt this too.
Didn't he use the word frustration? He used the word for
I know
that.
he used the word resilience. When you're
That's a positive side,
when you're being
but
resilient,
you're not feeling. You're
yeah, you don't,
feeling another feeling.
yeah, I guess you're feeling frustration.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about um just in life, living a long life and doing a lot of things in life? What do you have to say to the people about um being resilient and going through things, through hard things in life?
I can go down two roads here. I can go down the psych road. I can go down the faith road.
Just what do you got to say?
Listen to me. I'm saying, if I go down the psych road, I'm going to give suggestion, advice, ideas that are all time limited.
Which means,
They only have to do with your time in this world,
yeah.
in the main. I mean, they could, depending on how you go about them, apply to your spiritual life too. I would say, rephrase the question because I want to answer it accurately.
What do you have to say about resilience and going through like the hard times of life
Okay.
when you kind of feel like a loser, but you're really, working towards something better?
For me, the best way to do that is being a person of faith, of hope, of charity. If you go at it the way saints have gone after the goals in their lives, and a lot of them do not feel like saints,
Yeah.
they feel like the scum of the world, but they hang in there and they do this thing they know by then is the thing to continue doing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say go down the faith road, go down that road unquestioningly. Well, you can question, but not in a destructive question sort of way. There
Yeah.
are destructive questions out there. They're designed to destroy things. Don't use those. Use the questions that lead to responses that fit. Um, what you know from the beginning is so. You know, for example, there is a soul. You know this. You know that when you die, it's not poof, candle out, nothing left. Maybe a wisp of smoke and then it's gone.
Yeah.
You know there's a passage and you continue in another place. If you hold on to that and the God behind it, frustration then becomes something you got to go through. It's like heavy training when you go to basic training in military. You have to go through it. And there's an end to it. Once you know these things, it makes you better. There is an end to it, an outcome, and that outcome is worth seeking, and that it goes beyond this life further. That piece is important. Um, I would advise people to do it that way, to to not do it in a way that limits you to the wisdom of this world. Expand yourself into the wisdom that comes from faith, from hope, from living charitably. I don't think you expected that.
I don't know. I just asked it on the whim, just what you had to say about it. I thought it was very interesting. Yesterday, just the whole. Well, I listened to it yesterday. I just thought that the whole thing was very eye opening about how like yeah, like when you're trying to when you really are doing like stuff, and you really are being resilient, you don't feel it. You feel like the opposite. When you are
I'm
being
going through that
successful,
now.
when you are being successful, you don't feel like you're being successful. You feel like you're being a loser. But that's because in order to grow, you have to put yourself through the the trials and tribulations.
To go into that within which you never have been before.
Yeah, just like he was talking about too, about how like the Jews had to go through the desert.
Yeah.
Because they weren't ready. You got to go through the challenge. They weren't ready to go to fight the battles
No.
in
Canaan.
in Canaan. Yeah, that's the word. In Canaan, they weren't ready to go fight the battles in Canaan. They weren't the people. So by going through the desert, they were able to become the proper people for that.
Okay. Um, now, the way they did it, they had a leader.
Yeah.
A leader who, I'll say, had an in with the big man upstairs.
Yeah.
Um, and the people themselves, for all their inabilities at the outset, were being guided through the leader by the big guy upstairs.
Yeah.
Step by step, drawn bit by bit, seeing things that would just blow away anyone whose outlook on living life was limited to just what you see and hear in this world. When they came to the promised land and it was time to enter it, what happened?
Some of them couldn't come in.
That took place 3 weeks after they left Egypt. When 3 or 4 weeks after they crossed the Red Sea and got to Mount Sinai, Moses was up on the mountain for almost 30 days. They started to get impatient, and
Yeah, but I'm saying that some of them couldn't come in to the promised land.
The only one who couldn't come in was Moses.
Yeah.
Because he had disobeyed an order directly.
Yeah. So what are you asking? What happened when they got there?
When they got there and it was time to enter the promised land, what happened?
What happened?
Okay. The priests with the Ark of the Covenant moved to the Jordan first. As they stepped into the Jordan, the water stopped flowing.
Yeah.
What they had was a broad expanse of dry land for hundreds of thousands of people. They went across, as they say, dry shod without getting their feet wet.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of Hebrews going through. When the last of them was through, the priests with the ark left the Jordan bed, started to flow again.
Mhm.
They put 12 rocks either into the Jordan or near the Jordan at that point to commemorate it. When Christ was baptized by John the Baptist, that was the spot. Now, where did he go right after his baptism?
Where did he go?
Into the desert to
For
fast
40
for
days.
40 days.
Yeah.
But now notice, Hebrews, 40 years, hit the Jordan, enter the promised land. Christ comes to that spot in the Jordan, is baptized, leaves the promised land, into the desert, 40 days. As you read the Bible, look for these little things. They're all connected.
Yeah.
The Bible is connected the way the body is. Everything is one way or another in communication with everything else.
All right, I got 3 more questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
Have I gone too high up, too high a level, or?
What do you mean?
Sometimes I wonder if I'm talking at a level above.
Like I'm stupid and I can't
No.
understand?
I'm not talking just to you. There'll be people listening to this.
Listen, bro.
Well, they'll comment on it.
Just
That's up to them. So your
leave a
questions.
comment, a like, subscribe, all that. You guys know what's up. Anyway, 3 more questions. If you're willing to share, what's like the craziest thing you ever did? That you actually did? Because I feel like I know what you're going to say about going to Cuba, but you didn't do it. So what's the craziest thing you actually did?
I was so set to do it. No.
But you didn't do it.
Well, then the craziest thing I did,
Yeah, so then what's the craziest thing you actually did?
skiing down the side of Mount Popocatépetl in Mexico City in my shoes.
Yeah. With the ashes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had climbed up that. It's almost like Mount Fuji in Japan. It's very symmetrical. And we had climbed up from the saddle between the 2 volcanoes up to the snow line. When we got to the snow line, I grabbed snow, I made a snowball, and I threw it as far out toward Mexico City as I could. I don't know where it landed. And then to come down, it had been such a struggle going up, climbing in ashes, that I decided I was going to go fast. And I took a running start and then set my shoes a certain way, and I went skiing down the ashes on Mount
The whole
Popocatépetl.
mountain?
No, the friction would stop me. Get up some speed again, ski some more.
Oh. How high
Anybody
up were
see
you?
what?
How high up were you?
I think 17,000 feet.
It's like a mile, right?
Hmm?
Oh, 17,000?
Yeah,
17,000 feet a mile?
5,000 a mile.
Really?
Yeah, I was 3 miles up.
Oh, I'm bugging out. Damn, that's crazy.
5,280 feet is a mile.
I thought it's like 17,356.
No,
What is that? Maybe square feet in a mile? I don't know.
I
Something.
don't. I never.
Anyway. Okay. What is the biggest mistake society has made as a whole?
Materialism.
And the final question, what is the biggest difference between nowadays and when you were growing up? Between the people. Well, say between the people. I guess just between the people, between
The
anything.
society, the
Yeah, between the society and a whole, between the people, the way
and the
things flow.
society now. The society then was more coherent. Uh, it had its little bad sides here and there, but somehow it had the ability to hold together as a unified nation, neighborhood, what have you. From then till now, what has happened is divisions of interest, each interest setting itself up as a primary interest, deserving to push the others aside to get what it wants. So you see that in issues of race, you see that in issues of poverty versus wealth, you see that in issues of uh, availability of schooling at high levels. You see that in any number of ways, and yet undergirding it all, there's a lot of hypocrisy. The hypocrisy lies in the programs that are set up to solve the social problems that are being identified. They don't solve them. So, for example, you look at the issue of race going back to the time of Lyndon Johnson. Out of his program called the Great Society grew this equal opportunity movement where anybody of any race could be accepted at any school in the same way as anybody else of any other race.
What year was that?
I don't know when the equal opportunity stuff.
When was he president?
Oh, Lyndon Johnson?
Yeah.
Right after the assassination of Kennedy.
So like late 60s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or 70s. Let me see. I voted for Kennedy in 60. I think 68. Yeah, it would have been the 70s that Johnson was in power. First to complete Kennedy's years, and then his own election follow in the next election period. So he was in for about 7 years, 6.5, something like that. And his great program was the so-called Great Society, where money would be applied to minorities in such a way as to lift them up from the depths to which our prejudices had reduced them. Some kind of thinking like that. Now, my favorite commentator on all of that stuff is a black man. His name is Thomas Sowell, Sowell, a brilliant man. He's a member of the, I think, the Hudson think tank. And he comments on a lot of that stuff and how stupid the moves were made to divide our country by setting up promises that couldn't be kept. And people going for the promises, and when they weren't kept, becoming failures. Do I make sense?
I guess.
All right. There was a lot of poorly advised attempts to address problems that existed when I was a kid, but they weren't the kind of problems that were about to blow up. There were problems. People knew it. Those who were in the problem situation were actually working their way up out of it rather hard and doing well. And then when the government stepped in and said, we're going to do it this way, the people who were working hard said, oh, they're going to give us this?
No, but then they didn't pull through.
Why work hard? So what they did is they cut out initiative and the very people that they were going to, quote, help. Check Thomas Sowell.
We will. Everyone check Thomas Sowell. Okay. Well, that's all the questions that I had written down. We're about almost 2 hours in. But
you're going to have to do a lot of editing.
No, I'm not going to edit it too much.
You want to show 2 hours?
Yeah, it's a podcast, bro.
Oh,
how long are the podcasts that you watch?
It depends on the podcast. Yeah,
like 2 hours. An hour, 2 hours.
I've seen a couple of things that have gone beyond an hour, but I tend to spot those things that hit my points of interest and don't go too long, because my day is a day devoted to certain activities, and I don't want to take so much time I don't get those activities taken care of.
He's locked in for summer 25. Anyway, first guest on the show. First guest right here.
Pop.
Pop. Featuring Pop. What do you think? What should we name the podcast? I was gonna name it Real People.
Uh,
Because all I interview is regular people. Real people.
how about random conversation with a real person from way back?
Dude, no, like the name of the show.
Oh,
Yeah. Like the name of the show. Like blank featuring Pop for this episode.
life issues.
Life issues? Nah, I'm not messing with that because I don't just talk about issues. I just talk about whatever. I like real people.
Personal histories.
Personal history. That's fine. Listen, guys. Personal history. I'll put a poll in the comment. Personal history, real people, life issues. I was gonna do. I wanted to name it Raw Talk, but there's already a podcast named Raw Talk. Bradley Martin. But Raw Talk's a fire name. But anyway, because that's the name of his company is Raw.
Real talk.
I wanted to name it Real. That's why I got Real People from Real Talk. But Real Talk, Raw Talk, sounds too similar.
Okay.
But anyway, you know the outro, right?
Do I?
The outro?
I can't hear the
The
word.
outro, like the intro. We did the intro.
I never heard outro.
Well, there's an intro and an outro.
Well, it makes sense, but I never heard the word before.
Okay, when I clap, you got to clap and you say peace.
All right.
All right, but before we do that, everybody, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share. And with that being said,
Peace.
But you gotta go. Let me hear you do it. What's up? Let me hear you clap and say, "What's up, YouTube?"
What's up, YouTube?
Oh, all right, that's fire. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1.